Great to see you, Mark. Thanks for joining me.
Wonderful to be here. Thank you very much for having me. Go Lions.
Go Lions. I want to start. So I want to date this actually, 16th of April, 2025. And this morning, as you do every day, you put out a wonderful geopolitical roundup of the madness in the world. 5 or 6 points. Market turmoil from tariff actions. We've got market meltdown comparable to historic financial shocks like the 1929 crash or 2008 Lehman Brothers. Second point you make, global supply chain restructuring acceleration, number of things happening, including Apple reportedly airlifting $2 billion worth of phones out of India during March as tariffs loomed. 3, US and China relations enter a new phase, another new phase, escalated to new heights. Domestically, China has instructed its airlines not to place new orders with Boeing directly. Fourth point you make, American allies seek tariff accommodation and solutions. All sorts of craziness going on. South Korea unveiled a $23 billion support package for its semiconductor industry. Fifth point you make, big one, America's higher education export business under threat, an overlooked casualty of current policies in America's higher education sector, which you describe here as among America's most competitive international exporters, selling more educational services to the world than natural gas and coal combined. How did we get here, Mark?
Well, I think we got here. There's two things. There's the post-World War II, 1950s, Pax Americana, basically America's running the world. The rest of the world is still smoldering from World War II, recovering. So there was no competition. So it was very easy for American companies to be rich and prosperous and expand, build, go crazy. Which lasted, that was like a fake kind of high because there was, like I said, there was no competition. I mean, England was smoldering, France was smoldering, Germany was destroyed, Japan was destroyed. So there was really no competition. So that gave us a false sense of hope. America then was thrusted into this role that we really never expected. We're basically an isolationist nation, but suddenly we become a superpower with all these responsibilities that we've never really had before. Flash forward to the 80s when Japan, after 20, 30 years, came back on the scene and started selling a lot of cars in America, which was great for consumers because it gave you more choice, cheaper discounts, more competition, et cetera, which has inherently been the theme of the United States. The theme of the United States is let consumers buy whatever they want. One of my favorite sayings is like liberty in the pursuit of happiness. Pursuit of happiness could be if I want to buy a Toyota 4Runner, I should be able to do it. If I want to buy a, Aston Martin, I should be able to do it. If I want to buy cheese from France, I should be able to do it, right? And so we've kept tariffs really low. But that left out a huge howling out of manufacturing in the Midwest, the global Great Lakes, which we have a very interesting nostalgia romance for, even though nobody really wants to work in a factory. And then I guess the other big inflection point would be China. China coming into the World Trade Organization, entering the global market. It's a huge economy. There's over 1 billion people there. Essentially, the entire world shifted assembly there, right? Everybody from England, France, Italy, Japan, South Korea, the United States has shifted manufacturing there because the rest of the world, I think rightly so, has decided to concentrate more on R&D, software, and marketing, what to me like the real value is. So that's kind of a quick snapshot where we are. I guess the real thing is like Trump still thinks it's 1980 and then you can push it around the world. You can push it around Japan, which worked in the 80s. They were an ally, much smaller country, only 100 million plus people. China, 20% of the world to try is not going to be pushed around. And the rest of the world needs to trade with China. So that's where we are. And Trump's unleashed something that's completely unprecedented. It's akin to the black market. It's akin to the Berlin Wall falling down. Akin to Beatlemania. I mean, this is a huge inflection point in world history.
Fantastic. That's really helpful. Thank you. Interesting. Over here, we probably, I don't want to generalize, but the point you make about America being essentially an isolationist state, certainly, clearly isolationist prior to World War II. I get the impression from the way you put that you think there's something in the sort of psyche that means that even after World War II, America would prefer to have remained, if you like, not with the mantle of the world's policeman and a responsible party for keeping all the threads together, which had unraveled.
Well, we've never, like in the history of the world, there's never been this level of multi-integration. I mean, we're talking like the World Bank, the World Trade Organization. These are institutions that have never existed before, coupled with the fact, from a military standpoint, you have nuclear weapons, which completely changes the dynamics. And then you have a global Navy, right? That's going to protect all the shipping and commerce. And also there's been a sense, I think in DC that, listen, wars are going to happen. So instead of wars happening, why don't we place troops and material around the world, build alliances like NATO, build partnerships like the Quad, ban AUKUS, bring a lot of people into the fold, but have military around the world and keep the peace. And, I think what's quite remarkable, I'm sure there's been conflict and there's been strife. The fact that there has been a great power conflict, I'm talking like the big 7 nations, haven't fought each other in nearly 100 years. That's pretty remarkable. And it has everything to do with commerce and all these global institutions that we've created, which, as a voter or as a citizen, you may hate. But I think if you look at the other side, you're like, yeah, my kid hasn't fought a war against Russia, in Russia. The Germans haven't done anything crazy. The Japanese haven't done anything crazy. I think there's something said about that.
Yeah. What's the vibe you're in Washington, DC, right?
Yep.
What's the vibe there like right now?
Well, the vibe is, most people that come to DC that live and work in DC love politics. They love government. They were probably a student body president. They're just like plentiful nerds. They know history. They know policy. They know economics. They actually want to work in government, right? So the current team that's running the place in terms of the Team Trump and kind of what's happening on Capitol Hill doesn't want to govern at all. They still want to campaign. And there's a huge disconnect as we're seeing. Like Trump would love to roll out these tariffs, as he did on April 3rd, but within 2 weeks, the whole thing is like unraveling, right? People getting carve outs, people pushing back. Other countries are saying, hey, we're a sovereign country. We can do stuff too. We're not, for example, shipping soybeans to China, right? Because Brazil also has soybeans. So just because we're doing something stupid and trying to change the world doesn't mean the rest of the world has to go along. So I think there's just a sense of like, where are we going? What's the plan here? What's going on? None of this makes sense. There's an Adam Curtis documentary. I don't know if you know Adam Curtis documentarian, but he's got this crazy hyper normalization where there's just so much chaos going on in the world that you're just kind of like, oh, this is normal. But none of this is normal. Like, this is not how to run a government, especially a government that's tasked with really serious global responsibilities. Everything from the reserve currency to the fact that the United States is to live in nuclear aircraft carriers, and much of the world in the West is under our, protection. This isn't the way to act and go about trying to change an economic business model. So there's a lot of stress, but at the same time, there's a lot of opportunity. Like if you know how to play the game, clearly lobbying works, advocacy works, punching back. Trump's a pretty easy guy to figure out. He's a bit of a schoolyard bully. And I think we all know how to deal with schoolyard bullies. And it's the same approach. It's time to man up and lobby and get in front of the people and say, this isn't the way to do it.
Yeah, so many questions, Mark. Without getting into sort of, it's impossible in this conversation not to get into politics, but without taking any kind of ideological positions, is it right that Trump is a pragmatist? Is there any method in this madness? Part of me wants to believe that there may well be. And then part of me sees, as you've described, this unraveling.
Yeah, I think humans have a huge disposition to trying to explain things and trying to seek answers and believing that there's a master plan. I'm telling you, Trump has no 100-year plan. He has no 10-year plan. He has no 10-hour plan. The guy is an absolute day trader. He wakes up and just says, okay, what chaos are we going to create today? What are we going to try to do to make America great again, which is completely amorphous. It doesn't mean anything, but it's completely flexible and can change on a dime. So there's no plan. I mean, the tariff thing alone, in the 1930s, there's a famous bill in the United States called Smoot-Hawley, right? We passed tariffs on 20,000 products. And it led to a Great Depression, all kinds of strife around the world, not only in the United States, but also upheaval politically in Europe, Japan, etc. What Trump has done, he has tariffed the entire planet, like every country, even countries that don't have people. It's pretty unprecedented. And to give you the reason why this is so complex, getting back to the Boeing jet, the thing you mentioned about the Boeing jets, the United States still manufactures a lot of stuff. We just manufacture stuff that's big, like pickup trucks, SUVs, nuclear reactors, Boeing jets. We don't manufacture toasters or t-shirts, right? We've got upscale. But the Boeing jet is 6 million different components, right? And they're not all in the United States. In fact, they're around the world. So when you tax the entire planet, that's a problem. And to use the methodology of the trade deficit to create an economic model predicated on what's put into a box and shipped doesn't reflect the true value of stuff. And it's kind of a sophomoric way to measure trade. I mean, we're always going to have a trade deficit with Colombia because they have coffee. We don't have coffee in the United States. So, what are you going to do about that? Some of this stuff, it just doesn't seem strategic to me or focused. To me, it's just like another long line of the U.S. government trying to step in and save the economy. I mean, one of the things I wanted to talk to you about is inherently politicians anywhere in the world just feel compelled to do stuff, right? And usually good politics is bad economics.
Yeah, I wrote something last week, Mark, actually, when this was perhaps at its zenith. And it was slightly tongue-in-cheek, but it wasn't that I think the best thing we can all do at the moment, because everyone was out there saying, right, here's what's next. Here's what we need to do. And my view was what we all need to do is go fishing for 2 weeks.
100%. Yeah.
And do absolutely nothing.
Yeah.
Right? Because it'll be different tomorrow and it'll be different tomorrow again. And yet, as you said very eloquently, it's so serious. And I don't know. I think it feels to me advantageous for this conversation that I feel utterly unqualified to ask you any of the appropriate questions. So I'm just going to ask you the obvious things that spring to mind, which is, for example,
you're not unqualified. Like you, as a businessman, when you buy bricks and somebody slaps a tariff on concrete and sand and it's 25% more expensive, what are you going to do? I mean, some of this stuff is like a product now is 100% more expensive even before it's hit the shore, and you still got to sell it and you've got to pay the government first. Wow. Crazy.
So you've said there wasn't you said there wasn't a grand plan. The guy doesn't have a 100-year plan, a 10-year plan, or a 10-hour plan. So it's such an obvious question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Why?
He goes by gut. He's a day trader. I mean, here's the thing I've been thinking about a lot. And I was telling this to our friend, Greg Bunch. Like most governments in the United States, or even in the UK, right? They're surrounded by these very posh, well-educated corporate types, right? Which you may despise, the McKinseys of the world, the Goldman Sachs, the JP Morgans, General Motors, Googles of the world. Sure, you may not like them, but they're usually pretty smart, interesting people, and they have a very global perspective, and usually it's a 20, 30-year kind of long-term perspective. But again, if you're a day trader, if you're a small businessman, an entrepreneur, somebody who's out there just kind of hustling, making stuff happen, like in commercial real estate, your job is to survive that next day or that next payroll to keep the business going. So typically the people that run the government, there's a term called government sacks, because there's so many people that go in and out of Goldman Sachs between DC and New York. There's a term government sacks. We don't have that with the Trump team. We have whoever is the largest HVAC salesman in Southwest Florida, right? Which is great. He does very well, very successful, employs a few hundred people, but isn't a publicly traded company, isn't going to Davos, Elon Musk. I mean, Elon Musk is a complete renegade, amazing entrepreneur. He's not going to be beholden to what people read at the Wall Street Journal or the Financial Times. He's not going to be able to roll up to number 10, and have a pleasant conversation. So it's a different crew that's kind of running the government, and it's a different skill set and it's a different talent to be a day trader. But somebody, when you're running a government, especially, I just kind of impress upon how committed or how stretched the United States is around the world, and having the reserve currency, you got to act with a little more seriousness. There has to be a little more planning and a little more strategy, and you can't go to war with all your friends, and I think it's really a mindset thing. And I've really noticed kind of this like publicly traded corporate world versus the kind of entrepreneurial free market commercial real estate types that are like running DC right now.
Is there are some of the big players that were, vocal in support of change, whether or not they'd rather have had someone other than Trump, but they certainly didn't want a continuation of the democratic approach that was clearly, well, very considerably, comfortably beaten, wasn't it? I'm talking about people like Bill Ackman, guy I don't know a lot about, but every time I've listened to him speak, sounds incredibly astute, smart, long-term thinker, married to an incredible woman, Neri Oxman, you may know, who's a scientist, really deep thinker, and obviously very, very successful, up with the super, super, super wealth. I read recently, he's been vocal now in saying this is a mistake. People like that whispering either directly in Trump's ear or in the ear of people around him, such that there will be change. There will be whatever, I guess there's no policy, as you've said, but will there be change in approach? It strikes me that the one advantage that someone like Trump has is that he has absolutely no qualms about changing his position and saying, hey, it's a new day. This is today.
Yeah, which works if you're a day trader, but it doesn't work if you got to buy copper in 6 months.
If you've burned all of the goodwill in alliances that have held strong for 70 or 80 years.
Listen, I don't think the Democratic model was working. Clearly, Americans wanted to vote for change, but this much change, I don't think so. I think what happens with most politicians, they win the election. You'll see this around the world. They win an election and they're like, I have a mandate from the people. Well, you really don't have a mandate from the people. All you have is you are better than the other bum. That's all. That's the only thing that happened. The other, you didn't get as many votes as the other guy. And the idea that you have this mandate and you overgo, but even up until Liberation Day, April 3rd, I think they rolled this out at 4 p.m. East Coast time, they were still debating that afternoon exactly what the policy would be. And again, there was like this idea between politics. People love the word reciprocity. They understand that, right? Trade should be free, but it should be fair. So the idea of reciprocity made sense. So that forced them to be like, okay, we have to tariff the whole world, which doesn't make any sense. And I think that's why, and I like literally, as soon as all this happened, I was like, how's Trump getting it out of this? This is like a real problem. He's really boxed himself into a corner. And you're right. He can claim victory and he can say whatever he wants. And he can say, the golden age and this is all planned and I'm the art of the deal. But anybody who knows anything knows that this is complete madness. And it's not.
Does he have a genuine desire to see this huge middle part of America, which has been left behind by globalization? Does he have a real desire to see change there? Have the Republican Party become the party of the blue collar struggling American, which once was the other way around? Or is that just a convenient appeal to populism?
I think it's the latter. I think it's a convenient appeal to populism. I mean, it's also to say like, Ford and GM based in Michigan, they sell more cars in China than they do in North America. Right. So to say that globalization's been bad for Michigan or for the automotive industry would be a stretch. But we still make 18 million cars a year in the United States. They just don't happen to be made in Michigan, Ohio. I mean, South Carolina, Alabama, Louisiana, Tennessee, Kentucky. So there's a lot of anecdotes that kind of make sense. Like the Wall Street Journal recently profiled shrimp fishermen in Louisiana. And I don't know if you know, most of the shrimp that we eat in the United States comes from Vietnam, right? So does it come from Vietnam because it's cheaper and all that stuff? Yeah, but we also love shrimp. So there isn't enough shrimp boat fishermen in Louisiana to match the market. So you have this like disconnect. We have these stories of like people that have been cheated by globalization, one slice of the population, but collectively we've all benefited from the United States, right? But I agree, it's hard to explain all this, especially when you looked at a hollowed out town or a factory or a main street or a high street that's closed all its shops because the businesses have moved on. But there's other ways to approach this. Instead of having grievances and feeling sorry and putting up walls, I advocate that we should be selling more stuff. Like, I don't think we're actually globalized enough in the United States. I think we have such a big market here that we've been so lazy and so content that we're not pushing. But you look at the NFL, I look at teams, I look at the NFL. The NFL is like, yeah, we're going to play football in Berlin. We're going to play football in London. You know, I think that kind of moxie would really help other companies in the United States. Instead of being so fearful of the world, let's get in it. We have the best companies in the world. Let's start selling more stuff. You know, if we were in the Netherlands, we were in Quebec, these are small markets. Inherently, they had got to go out and find other places to sell. I think we've been a little spoiled in the United States. And also, why doesn't Trump, if he's a billionaire, why doesn't he just take his cash and build plants in Michigan? Like, I've never understood why he needs the U.S. government to do it. That's just a kind of a joke. But it's only like, what's the right approach? How do you be more global? It's kind of the question. How do you do it with the world? You put up tariffs and walls, or do you become more competitive? I think being more competitive, competing, getting after it, selling goods and services around the world is a better approach.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, prediction is a notoriously dangerous game. So it's unfair of me to ask you. I'm going to anyway. What happens next, Mark? What happens next?
Well, I think if you have the resources and the fortitude and you can access and you can lobby, I think these tariffs are going to kind of be clawed back. There'll be carve outs. We've seen with Apple just happened recently. The whole tech sector happened on Friday. There's talk about the automotive sector getting their tariffs come off. But they all have like lobbyists. They've all had big presences. I think what's really interesting, if you're a small business person, if you run like a bike shop, if you're a small manufacturer where you're doing final assembly in the United States and you don't have the time or wherewithal to kind of speak to the government, you could be screwed in this kind of trade deal. So I think these tariffs stay on for a while. I think we go into a recession. I think the Democrats take back the House and it's a whole new ballgame. But I really think Trump has overstepped in a big way. And it's going to be the downfall. Like, it's just too much. You can't tariff the world. That's just too much.
Yeah.
It's just too much gravity. It's just too much weight.
And so you say when the Democrats take back the House, that's what, 2 years in the midterms? Is
Yeah,
that right?
the next election will be in 2026. And right now, the Republicans have a 2 or 3 seat majority in the House of Representatives, right? You need 218 to pass legislation. I think they have 220. Usually, you know, a few people die, they drop out, but the next election is 2026. And usually, and there's historically in the midterm election, after 2 years after the president's been selected, there's usually a shift in the House. Because invariably, the United States really likes to operate with kind of divided government. When you have united government, you get this kind of crazy pushback. And I mean, there's no way saying no. You know, it's like raising a child and there's no adult supervision. So when you have divided government, you have a bit of adult supervision and you have people pushing back. And I think that's a better economic model for America. But we'll see. We can all be broke by 2026.
I was going to say, that's plenty of time to do irreparable damage, isn't it? Or generational damage in terms of time frame.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, these tariffs are, it's like incalculable. I mean, you're going to hear more and more about small business people that they're doing final assembly or, you know, they do assembly in Asia, but the real value is in the marketing and the branding and the customer service that they provide. And they're just looking for a low cost way to make some kind of product they want to sell in the United States. But if it suddenly becomes 50, 100% more expensive across the board, we're talking like pharmaceuticals, t-shirts, bicycles, kitchen aid, like kitchen equipment. I was flying out west and I was sitting by an architect here in town. He does a lot of remodels, kind of upscale stuff, but very creative, interesting guy. He was already seeing a pushback. This is before the tariffs even came on board. Like they're like economic uncertainty. Should we be doing this? Like, what's the price of a toilet going to cost? Toilets don't sound that sexy, but if they're $100, $200 more expensive and you're building an apartment complex and you need 1,000 toilets,
Yeah.
can you afford it? And I think that's, these kind of economic realities are really heavy. I mean, there's so much wisdom in Adam Smith, going back to like these like core principles. I can appreciate, I think every government inherently, from Beijing to London to Paris to DC, wants to they feel compelled to do something. And this is what Trump's calculation, he was compelled to do, to put these tariffs in place in the hopes of creating economic prosperity. But it's probably not the best way to do it.
What about us? I mean, one of the things I love about your work is, you truly are sort of internationalist in your outlet. You absorb stuff from everywhere. You know the inside of the FT and the Telegraph and the Times better than anybody I know. I guess that goes with the territory, with the work you do as a geopolitical strategist.
Yeah.
But what about us? How does Britain fare?
I think I wrote about this a few years ago because it was funny. The U.S.-China relationship, it's a new paradigm. It's always in a new. But anyways, I think about these kind of the UK, France, Germany, Italy, Mexico, Canada, Japan, super important countries, massive economies, big players. They're like, what are we going to do? Like, which way do we go? And I think that's going to be like the next real debate, right? Because it would be really foolish, I think, for any country to completely devoid themselves to the United States, especially because of our military security and apparatus. But at the same time, all the growth is in Asia. So countries at this kind of second level are really going to be in a tough spot. Australia is a classic example, right? Australia has the sub deal with the UK and the US, right? So you have national security. Australia's national security in the West, but their whole economic model is like, how do we sell more iron ore to China, right? And it's going to be really tough for countries like Australia to really ride this seesaw. It's not going to be an easy time.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's the thing, that part of the challenge must be for politicians to be thinking, we can't afford to wait to ride this out. We can't afford to assume that there'll be a further change. So, for example, at the moment, quite rightly, all of the big European economies are starting to invest in defense again. We got away with murder, and frankly, that's thanks to you guys. But it's time to do the right thing. Where do we invest? I mean, I was reading that, even if we built a whole load of new jets or import jets from you guys, you can control the software. I mean, I'm not suggesting that America would ever want to turn rogue, but these are really huge decisions that take years and years to play out through manufacturing. And we have to make those decisions right now. And that's what I mean about generational change. Even if this, stops kind of playing out the way it is now in 2 years' time, the whole world order will have been reorganized, won't it?
Yeah. So what's going to be interesting is that, Trump has been invited for a state visit. That is to meet King Charles. And there's rumors that it actually may this time happen at Balmoral, right, in August, which is high. He's done the castle, he's done Windsor, he's done Buckingham. But as you know, Carl, to go to Balmoral would be fantastic, right? I mean, that's like the big deal. So I think, and this is not an exaggeration, King Charles has a lot of pressure on this visit, and he's really going to sit down and say, listen, buddy, you have a unique place in the world. We want to be a part of it, but you got to lead better. You can't be fighting with your allies. And I think that's going to be the conversation. Meloni from Italy is in town, I think today or tomorrow, in Washington, D.C. I suspect she's going to have the same conversation with Trump and just say, listen, we're not the problem here. Let's work together. And we'll see how that mutters out. But I think if things don't change, you're spot on. Like countries are going to have to make some big decisions, both not only for the national security, but also their economic security.
Has some of this been caused, Mark, by Russia's actions? I mean, to what extent, there's all this stuff. Oh, Trump got supported first time round and his organization or his administration is riddled with sort of Russian sympathizers and so on. That's always struck me as being perhaps a bit fanciful. But the fact that there is a war in Ukraine, Russia is, doing what it's doing, and America has obviously spent a lot of money in that theater. Notwithstanding, I suspect it's been very good for a lot of American businesses. Probably will
For
be
sure.
very good for you in the long run economically because of repayment on debt and whether or not you ever end up controlling Ukraine's minerals. Is that a big part of why we're in this scenario with, tariff madness, or is that just something else that's part of the disorder and the chaos in the world at the moment?
I mean, Trump he's supported Democrats. He's run as a Republican. The only consistent thing, this goes back to the 1980s, is around tariffs. Like he famously ran a full page ad in the New York Times about Japan and the automotive industry and tariffs. This has been like a consistent thing.
Right.
And people on the campaign trail, they love tariffs. It sounds great. Slap tariffs. But when they're actually put in place, people are like, they don't like them. You know what I mean? And I think the thing that Trump failed to understand is like, at the end of the day, the cultural stuff comes and goes, DEI, the border, immigration, you have different positions, but the greatest, like the core thing about America is business and the ability gets back to the pursuit of happiness. Like if I want to buy Italian wine, I should be able to buy Italian wine. I shouldn't have to pay 100% tariff on it, the whole pursuit of happiness, competition. It's good for the consumers. Like our antitrust, if you go back to the antitrust, the reason these big tech companies haven't been broken up, antitrust in America isn't predicated on how much of the market you control. It's how much you're charging the consumer, right? And you can say Amazon is the biggest e-commerce retailer in the world, and they could be, but they're not driving up prices. Like they're making the argument we're actually driving them down, and that's why we're using us. So we're not violating antitrust. We're not abusing our monopoly. And that economic kind of foundation in the United States is really true. But I just generally think Trump believes in tariffs, which is fine, but we're seeing the economic reality of it. I mean, maybe he just had to, like the thing about economics and all this stuff is like, you can talk about it, but until it's actually put in place, you actually see it happen, then you know the reality. We've never had this level, even in the 30s, which is that tariff. We've never had this level of tariffs. I mean, it's like, it's completely changed not only the economic model of the United States, but also the buying model. I mean, just like consumers. A car is now 25% more expensive because of what?
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's not great. And there's actually, I wish I could find this. This is from a few months ago, but I don't know. There was like article in the Telegraph columnist. I'll try to find it and send it to you. But she basically made the case like, listen, America's over. They're broke. They need to do these tariffs because they don't have any money. Our debt is so out of control. We can't tax our citizens anymore. So yeah, we got to raise tariffs because we need the cash.
What have you got? You've got about $1 trillion worth of debt, haven't you?
It's like 120% of the economy. No, it's like 20, $30 trillion. Our economy is like $25 trillion. So our debt is like $30 trillion.
Jesus.
It's a bit of a problem. And so that could be, that could really be the real story that nobody's talking about. I mean, is America, we have debt. So what does debt mean? Is always an interesting question. Can you control it? Can you manage it? And, you can until you can't, right? So that article really struck me because there's also, it's been interesting because younger people, and even Trump talked about this the other day. He got interviewed on Fox Spanish news channel, and he was talking about how tariffs can help replace or lower the income tax rate. And there are younger people in their 20s that love this idea. They're like, why would we pay, income tax? Let's have the rest of the world pay for it. But if nobody has any money to buy anything, I mean, it's a very chicken and the egg kind of situation, right? If nobody has any money to buy anything, what does it matter? You're not going to import anything anyways because you're going to be broke. And the debt thing is really interesting because I would always remind people, like, yeah, like we're providing military assistance around the world, but the rest of the world is buying our debt to kind of keep this thing going. You know, Japan, China, the UK, they're buying foreign treasuries or they're buying US treasuries. They're financing our debt. We build ships. We have a market, et cetera, et cetera. Let's keep this thing going. But Trump is throwing a wrench into that. And he hasn't fully, nobody really knows what he's thinking because he's a day trader. He's not, like, there's been no grand policy speech. You know, he's gone out to the world and said, okay, listen, I know this sounds crazy, but here's what we're going to do. And these are the 5 reasons why we're doing it. Nobody knows that.
Yeah.
The tariffs alone have been about drugs, immigration, building factories, reciprocity. I mean, like every day, it's almost like throwing spaghetti against the wall. They're just like, what's going to stick to, what can we use today to kind of settle this? And the real reason might be we're broke. We've got no money. How do we service the debt?
So in the context of the unenviable job you have right now of advising multinational companies, how do you advise leaders in the balance between sort of this short-term geopolitical risk management and long-term strategic thinking or positioning in such a chaotic, disordered, unpredictable world? Or are you sitting on your hands at the moment and saying, we need to go fishing with Carlo for a few weeks?
We always got to go fishing with Carlo. But I think there's a running joke, you know, people are like, they're calling like, what the hell's going on? And you're like, I don't know. And then they're like, that's why we pay you, you know? But I think there's, my advice to folks has been, there's got to be a short-term, midterm, and kind of long-term approach. Short-term, you got to speak to your politicians. You got to like engage the government. You got to get out there. You got to be communicating, talk about what's going on, why these are good and bad. And the second thing is, you know, figuring out like, where do we go from here? Like, what is really the business model? And I think being more resilient, more reliant, and more focused. But even the U.S. could probably operate at a 10, like most tariffs around 2 or 3%, right? That's like the average rate around the world. You know, there's some special exceptions for the kind of steel and other kind of national security products, if you will. But most things are tariffed at a few percentage points, right? That's doable, right? Even probably 10% is doable, to be honest, right? But you know, as a business person, you know this. Like the biggest thing is like, just tell me what the rules are. I'll figure it out. Like not knowing what the rules are and the fact that they can change from day to day is a huge problem because you can't plan. So just having some economic sanity around that. And maybe we do need the money. Maybe we do need to charge 10% because we need to pay off this debt. We need to find other ways to do it. Let's have that conversation. But the way it's been handled right now has been very day tradery, show business, reality show. It's just not serious, you know? And that's a problem. But I think it's equally a problem that U.S. business leaders and civic leaders haven't done enough to like speak to voters about economic realities and also engaging with their employees and also their elected officials and how business actually works.
Yeah, very struck by what you said a few moments ago about, you know, encouraging your clients to engage with politicians and talk to them. I take it from that you see that you know, real definitive impact of doing that. And the reason I raise that is because I think there's such a sense here of, well, it's cynicism, Mark, that will never make a difference. I mean, I guess it does for, you know, FTSE 100 businesses and others. They have teams of lobbyists doing this. So perhaps I'm being naive and seeing this from the perspective more of a small and medium enterprise.
It's always tough for the small and mediums. I agree. Like they're just, because they're smaller. I mean, you know, so inherently the bigger companies have more say in how the world operates, for right or wrong. But not engaging our politicians, even like the estate tax, or I don't know what they're exactly calling it, but how labor wants to charge family farms and kind of a inherited tax, right? That requires engagement, like getting in front of politicians, both on the streets, driving tractors in London, but also speaking to them and say, hey man, this doesn't work. Like it may sound good in a debate. It may sound good at the Oxford Union, But in reality, let me tell you what this is all about. And
Yeah.
most of my
Yeah.
job, my whole career is about getting people from outside the Beltway to come to DC and just have honest conversations, make it a point to meet with your elected officials a few times a year just to check in and say, you know, they don't understand business models. They're not meeting payrolls. They don't understand how this stuff works. It sounds good. It's all theoretical. It's all on PowerPoints, but they're not in the trenches. They're not at the coalface meeting payrolls or having to deal with this. Or like, how do you plan to, buy anything? Because you just don't know what the price is. So I think there's been a lot of disconnects, and I feel there hasn't been enough engagement by U.S. citizens and U.S. business leaders and civic leaders to have honest conversations with politicians on both sides of the aisle. Just say, these ideas are nonsense. This isn't how it works. Sure, let's find a solution, but this approach isn't the right one.
Fascinating. So you're a communications expert. You're an orchestrator of dialogue, of conversations, of meetings, aren't you? More than you are a Machiavellian strategist in the sort of darkest realms of political shenanigans. Your
No, I
work's
do.
about getting
I play in
people to
shenanigans.
engage.
I play in shenanigans. I
But
love it.
what I mean is,
strategy is like the key, but at the end of the day, democracy is a participation sport. It's not just about voting. It's about showing up a lot and talking to your elected officials and saying, hey, that was a great idea. This is bad. Hey, come down to my factory. Hey, come tour my construction site. Hey, come down to my bakery. It's like little things like that. It's also writing, communicating, being on podcasts, speaking. It's a big component. Like, especially getting back to like the FTSE 100 or the S&P 500. Like Tim Cook's in DC, maybe 20, not just DC alone, but he's in DC, Beijing, London, Paris. Like 20-30% of their time is just spent on government relations. Now you could say, hey, I'm a small business person. I don't have time for that. But, do you have 10% of your time? Do you have like 4 or 5 times a year meet with your MP? Just in a coffee or invite them to your place of work? It doesn't always have to be big dramatic swings, but I think there's a disconnect somehow because this never should have happened.
Yeah.
There were too many assumptions, like it just wouldn't happen. And here we are across the board in capitals around the world, but also in the United States. And we've had so much peace and prosperity. We really haven't had to worry about too many things in the scheme of things, right? Because we've had these great power conflicts. We have clean water, we get stuff delivered to us. We get Uber Eats to send us a burrito in 20 minutes. Amazing, right? We can watch soccer anytime we want. So there's been a lack of civic engagement on us. And I think that's why we're here.
Yeah. You've given me a thread there, Mark, obviously, because I know you love football. You'll obviously be tuning in a couple of weekends' time to see Crystal Palace play Aston Villa in the semi-final of the FA Cup. I will, I'm glad to say, be there.
Let's do it. I got to root for Crystal Palace.
Of course you
That's really great. Fantastic.
You also offered me a little segue, which I missed about 5 minutes ago when you were talking about some of our government's policy on taxation. What do you make of Starmer and what he's been up to? Him personally, more so than the government over here at the moment.
He just doesn't seem that dynamic. He just seems like, again, getting back to what we talked about earlier, it wasn't like the people of the UK elected Starmer or the Labour Party. They just were sick of the Tories, right? And there's really no mandate there. There's no passion. There's no energy. I think he'll just be a footnote. He's just there. He's a smart guy. He's interesting. He's well-intentioned, but he's not the kind of dynamic leader I think the UK needs at this time.
And what do you see happening on our horizon 4 or 5 years out?
Well, I would think that the Tories will come back to power with some dynamic leadership and launch a golden age. I don't think England or the UK in and of itself is a center-left country. I think it's more of a center-right country. And Starmer is just basically a placeholder between conservative parties.
Yeah, it's always struck me as being kind of weird, when really the rest of the world broadly, that was certainly the rest of the Western world, moved from wherever it was to the center and a bit further right. We went the other way. That felt to me like an aberration that was born out, as you say, of being sick to death of continued
Yeah. I
failure.
mean, there are
And
conservative PMs in 12 years. I mean, that's pretty crazy.
yeah,
Like in most governments in 24, most incumbent governments lost. And that was the trend there. I don't think it had anything to do with, again, the country suddenly swinging left. Had more to do just being exhausted. Being in power for 12, 13 years is crazy. There's a basketball coach, coaches college basketball, Buzz something, interesting guy, just left Texas Tech to go to Maryland. And his theory is he moves every 6 years. He talks about this as a basketball coach. He tries to find programs that are a little underperforming that he can take, maybe not to the championship, but move them up to the mid-table, right?
yeah,
But what happens, so he does that year 2 and 3, but years 4 and 5, people are so used to victories that they expect championships. And he's like, his big thing is like, that's not my job. My job, I'm going to change agent. I'm going to get you guys to a higher level, but he doesn't overstay his welcome. And I think a lot of politicians, Joe Biden included, right? I mean, Joe Biden would have gone down as a hero. He said, hey, people, I'm here for one term. You know, I'm an off ramp to Trump. Let's have a great debate, have a great primary. But he stayed at the party too long. But it's hard once you get those jobs to say you want to go.
yeah. A couple more questions for you before we move away a little bit from politics, if you're happy to do that. What do you? Is there a leader? Is there a world leader or a country and its leadership at the moment that you look at with, you know, with respect, or with, that's playing the long game kind of better than anyone else? And why? And you know, and are we not talking about them enough? Who impresses you on the political stage?
Yeah, I mean, 3 people that come to mind: Meloni in Italy. She's a really fascinating character. I also love the way she uses fashion, like the politics of clothes, very well. I like that she's just kind of embraced herself and kind of Italian specialness, right? Italy's a very interesting country to me. Long history, amazing design, great manufacturing, amazing agriculture. You know, like who doesn't love Italy, right? So, and I think she's like really kind of encompassed what makes Italy special without being so crazy. She's been very level-headed, controlled, and cool. I've always found Macron in Paris and France super interesting, which will probably not surprise anybody. I mean, just the fact that he started his own political party, I find really compelling. Interesting character. I've always found the French interesting because they're so into being French, you know, and
Yeah,
Macron is like, you know, really like espouses that, which I think is kind of cool. But I think he's an interesting character. I think we're going to be, you know, it's tough. There's a famous saying, you know, it's tough to run a country that has like 300 different cheeses, right? I mean, France is an interesting place, but I think he's an interesting character. The other guy is Milei in Argentina. We got to visit Argentina back in November. I was down there for a week in Buenos Aires. Amazing country, massive, huge. Just feels like it's kind of an empire waiting to be explored. It just hasn't been managed correctly. He's an interesting character. You may not totally agree with, you know, all his approaches or his, you know, theatrics, but, you know, people are talking about Argentina. And I think Argentina, you know, Argentina, it's a G20 country, right? It's one of the 20 largest economies in the world. Now, once 100 years ago, it had a bigger 1800s. No, it's maybe 200, 150 years ago, bigger economy than the United States. I think that's a country to watch. I think like Argentina, if it just made its life easier, there's still apparently people in the government that have, but it's not all democracy. They still have like family claims on seats, and you know, there's some like holdover from kind of the Spanish Empire. But if Argentina could sort itself out, I think that'd be really one to watch. And I think Milei is trying to do that. You know, it takes like a big personality to move the boat. So those are 3 countries that come to mind. Interestingly, like they're all in the Atlantic Ocean. I think going west or going east, if you will, I would find Singapore super interesting, very pragmatic, you know, very modern, super interesting city, punching way above its weight. But, you know, only 4 million people on an island, so it might be an easier place to cover. But those are kind of those 3 leaders in Singapore kind of countries I watch out for.
brilliant, very interesting. I mean, with my heritage, you had me with Italy. Grudging admiration for the French. I love the way you put that. They just love being French, right? And Argentina, I have to say, Mark, was a country that utterly blew my mind. We were fortunate enough to travel for quite a few weeks around Chile and Argentina back in 12
Amazing.
years ago, 11, 12 years ago. And I'm a bit of a homeboy. I could live in Italy happily for obvious reasons. But we did discuss, relatively seriously, of all the places to move to, if any, Chile and Argentina, definitely, definitely. I mean, I thought Argentina was stunning geographically, the people, the warmth, very difficult to work out how that has been such an economic basket case for so long.
I just even walking around. I mean, I was just in BA, but even like I was like these sidewalks aren't as nice as they should be. And I mean, like there just needs to be like a little more investment, like a little more care and attention. There has to be a will though. There has to be like a will within the country to be like, hey, we want to be, we want to play in the global big game. And maybe Argentina hasn't done that. They haven't wanted to do that because they've been so content. But I think they've got a real opportunity to be a country to watch going forward.
Mm, mm. Okay, last sort of deeply political thing I want your observations, your insight on, if you don't mind, is um, this idea of, which we're living through at the moment, that the rules-based international order is over. It's been torched by dear old Don. Is that right? Or was it always just a convenient sort of fiction for powerful states?
Well, I mean, sure, like some of the tariffs and some of the trade deals the United States have entered into may have been broken. But the rest of the world is still operating by all kinds of rules, I mean, the aviation industry, there are thousands of planes in the air right now flying around the world, globally integrated. I guess it depends how you look at it, right? People are still trading stocks, still trading currencies. I just think when it gets to economics, just having such a sudden change, especially a change that's more expensive, makes it really complicated. Now, if Trump had made the world cheaper to sell goods and services, it'd be a totally different conversation. But when you make things more expensive, it's a pretty shocking situation.
Yeah.
I mean, I didn't give up on the world. People are still talking. Even the US and the Iranians are talking. So it's good.
Is Don serious about getting a Nobel Peace Prize? Is that what he's after?
I think he wants all the adulation in the world. That's why I think the Balmoral visit is so crazy. It's so important. Like Carlo, he's a guy, this guy. He's a guy at the local pub, the local club, who loves to brag. I got to do this special thing in Scottsdale. Oh, I got invited to this special museum in Rome, private tour. He's like that kind of guy. So yeah, just give him every award, accolade. Like literally, if King Charles gives him a crown, that could be the greatest achievement of King Charles's career. Appease this guy, like settle him down. I mean, he didn't get enough affection, and he just loves the adulation.
I got to be honest with you. So cards on the table here. I'm a fan of King Charles, and I love the fact, as you say, that he, to some extent, has Britain's success over the next 4 or 5 years or beyond in his control. I kind of love that.
No, I think that meeting is going to be one of the most consequential meetings, but also for the UK.
Well, people forget Donald's mother, Scottish.
Right.
And he regards himself, quite rightly, in my opinion, as a Scot or a demi-Scot. Yeah. Not a demigod, a demi-Scot.
But even like King Charles, like all this nonsense about Canada, right? Making Canada the 51st state, it's hard to, I don't think Trump knows that King Charles is the head of government of Canada, right? But King Charles, suddenly, when he was on a Navy boat a few weeks back, he was flashing more of the maple, more of the red and the white, just a subtle gesture. And literally, that's going to be the conversation King Charles is going to say at Balmoral. Listen, buddy, this is actually my realm. You're not taking Canada.
Dude, you're shitting on my nest here.
Yeah. To me, it's super interesting meeting. The fact that they decided to do a Balmoral, I just hope it's this summer and not next, because I don't think we can wait that long.
No, I agree. So look, here we go. You're a Detroit boy. You're passionate about a lot of things. and it's lovely. It's very uh, it's very magnetic. You're a Detroit boy, so much so I am standing here in a Detroit Lions cap, which was gifted to me by your very good self. As a result, by coincidence, that I had decided as a crazy sport lover that they were my team about 5 years ago, having been featured on a Sky series, which I believe we bought from the States, called something like School of Hard Knocks, about the preseason training regimes for
Yeah.
American football teams. I fell in love with a guy called Dan Campbell, who we're going to come on to. And then it obviously came to light that you are a Lions man, cut you and you bleed blue. And so here we are, having had almost zero success in their history, now one of the top dogs in American football. What makes Dan Campbell, the guy who has sort of orchestrated this turnaround, what makes him such a compelling leader, Mark?
Well, I think Dan Campbell grew up in a small Texas town, right? Which I think is kind of important. Out in the plains, the West Texas plains. I think he went to A&M. He was also a member. He played for the Detroit Lions. He played for the team that went 0-16. Imagine you don't win one game, right? And I think the city just resonated with him. And I think what really turned it around, what's been interesting, the Lions management did some interesting things. Usually football teams, you probably see this with like soccer clubs or football clubs in the UK. Like they'll go after like the hot stars. So like, let's say Brendan Rodgers was Celtic up north, he's probably the next hot guy. Does he go to a big club? These guys kind of rotate in and out, and they bring the whole crew with them, right? Like when you hire Jose Mourinho, you get him and like his 5 or 6 other assistants, right? And they basically say, okay, you did this with Celtic, let's replicate it. And what the Lions have done in the past, like the Patriots are the hot team. So I hired Matt Patricia, defensive coordinator from the New England Patriots. They hired him. They brought the whole New England Patriots. They're like, basically, let's make Detroit New England West, right? Which Boston, New England is not Michigan, it's not Detroit, right? And this model hadn't worked. So the owner was like, screw this model isn't working. We need to do something totally different. So they did something completely unique. They hired the general manager and the coach independently. They didn't know each other. So they can arrange marriage, right? Usually the GM gets hired first. He hires his best friend, the coach, right? Or the coach comes in and says, I want this guy to be GM. They changed that around. Forced marriage, I think is super interesting. And they went after a guy who was just like, listen, this is what Detroit's all about. It's like Detroit's an interesting city, very dynamic, but it's not pretty. It's smokestacks. It's like blue collar. It's not fashionable. Like nobody would ever confuse Detroit for Milan, right? And they're like, let's go in all on that, and let's find players that subscribe to that mantra. And that's been like, it's almost been like a vibe. So like the attitude comes from the top, new thinking from the management, grittiness, and then finding players that kind of buy into that. And they've got amazing athletes playing for the Lions right now. And it's like spread to the other, like the Tigers, we're talking about the baseball team, the best team in baseball right now. The Detroit Pistons are going to be in the NBA playoffs for the first time in years. And they're all kind of working together. So I think that kind of vibe, that kind of grittiness, saying, no, we're not going to import an attitude. We're going to embrace the attitude that we have, is something I think other people can learn from, even other brands. Just say, no, this is what we're about, and this is what we're going to do. And not importing, not trying to copy. It's like what I say about France. Like France is really into being French. Like they're like, this is what we do in France. And I think Detroit and Dan Campbell's had the same attitude. It's like, this is Detroit. This is what we're about. We drive pickup trucks. We wear flannel. We play hard-nosed football. You want to be a part of it? Yes or no?
Love it. And you go and get young Hutchinson, who's a Detroit boy as well, who's star. Shame he got injured. How on earth did we lose to the Washington Commanders, Mark?
I don't know. Something to talk about it, man. That was a dark day. I don't know. It's in some ways, well, there's been pushback, and like it's interesting getting back to this kind of grittiness kind of vibe. Like Dan Campbell's such a hard charger that they went into the playoffs with like 20 injured players. So like, wasn't like they ran too hard during the regular season that they weren't ready for the playoffs, right? And they had some amazing victories, and also if you throw 5 interceptions on a football game, you're not going to win very many games. at the pros.
No. Next season, good vibes?
Nervous, always. Don't want to get my hopes up.
It's really fascinating, actually, as a guy who is so passionate about his home city, the way you talk about it with such sort of detached honesty. But it feels to me, given what you've just said about the sort of the sporting renaissance for Detroit, is that reflecting a renaissance for the city itself? Which, I mean, what happened to Detroit, Mark? For the benefit of people listening to this that aren't in the States, what happened to Detroit?
1960, there were 2 million people living in the city of Detroit. You also got to understand the city of Detroit itself is 143 square miles. It's a huge physical place, and it's also in a very flat part of Michigan, right? And they make cars, right? They make a lot of cars. So the combination of people wanting to move out to the suburbs, highways, access to vehicles, really hollowed out the city and created this like huge sprawl. So now Detroit is like this huge metroplex, going out 40 miles in every direction. And people have left the city of Detroit for a number of reasons. Taxes are high, schools aren't great, the properties were never that great, and they chase new development outside the city. So I think what you're going to see, Detroit's going to have like a core, economic core, entertainment core, residential core. And it's going to be surrounded by, frankly, green space. And you have this huge commuter belt of subdivisions and suburbs around it. But the geography of the place is it's so flat, Carlos. So like, it was very easy to build roads, very easy to build highways. And again, if you live, even my mom, my grandfather, my dad, my mom's father worked for Ford. My mom's in her 80s. She still gets an employee discount at Ford. So it wasn't unheard of. Like everybody in Detroit gets a car, as soon as you turn 16, you get a car. And if you have a car with no public transport, great highways, you can build houses 20, 30 miles out. And the cars, like everybody drives. In like Michigan, the way it talks about distances, they talk about how far stuff is by minutes. Everybody's driving all the time. So I think it's a combination of that. It's not purely economic. It really is more, I think the geography of the place is kind of interesting. But you're seeing a return. What's cool about Detroit is it kind of missed all that kind of glass nonsense like Canary Wharf. It kept a lot of infrastructure from the 20s and 50s. So amazing Art Deco buildings, stone facades, like just incredible buildings that have been preserved. They're being brought back to life. It's kind of exciting. And to your point about the sports, they put all 4 sports teams within a block of each other. So you have like this core sports district, which then allowed for other kind of entertainment options, et cetera, kind of build out from there. So it's been an interesting renaissance.
That reminds me of, you ever come across Brian Eno's idea of what he called scenius? So it was his take on the idea of kind of genius in a scene. So
okay.
In his context, it was very much art and music for obvious reasons. But he attributes a lot of innovation to this idea of scenius. You get the right people in the right place and you get this kind of synergistic effect.
Yeah.
And lots of great things happen. It sounds like that's happening now with the sport, as you said, by putting them a block apart. There's bound to be this sort of bleeding between teams of high performance thinking and so on, which is great. Do you think that was true in the music scene? I mean, obviously the other great thing as a Brit that we love and remember Detroit for is Motortown, right? Berry Gordy, all those incredible, bands that came out in the late 60s and 70s. And we probably bought as much of them as you guys did. So tell me about the birth of Motown and the music scene.
Music has always been, like Detroit is interesting. If you look at the Detroit flag, it's always been a mixing pot, right? It's on the river between US and Canada. So you have that dynamic, which most of America doesn't ever think about another country. If you live in Detroit, you're thinking about Canada all the time, right? In fact, Canada is south of you, so it's also this weird anomaly, but just exposure to another country happens naturally. The Detroit flag is interesting because it has representation, because it used to be run by the Brits. So there's the English, the 3 lions. It has the fleur-de-lis, because it was settled by the French, and it has the red, white, and blue by the United States. So it's like cosmopolitan, weird mix up of different countries. It's represented on the flag. And the Motown thing, you're spot on. I mean, there was a huge influx of tourists or immigrants from Germany, Ireland, Poland, but also there's a huge migration from the South of African Americans that came up to the North to work in factories. So Detroit has had this weird mixing pot, which has created all kinds of great music from Motown, but also house music, EDM, jazz. There's two great festivals, Memorial Day weekend. There's a festival dedicated to dance music, EDM music. And then in the fall, there's a jazz festival. That still resonates today. Like Detroit is truly a great rock and roll town, great place to see concerts. I don't know. It's something in the sauce. There's something about like, I don't know, about working in a factory that just makes you want to sing good music.
Mm. When am I coming? Let's do a waggle or an Ember Sessions or something like that.
We
over
got to
there.
get you to Detroit, man. You're gonna
Oh
love it.
man, that is a city I would really love to see, which is going to bring me on to my next question. You already mentioned the quality of some of the historic buildings. Well, perhaps before I ask you the question, I'm going to make an observation. I don't spend a lot of time, genuinely, I'm pleased to say, on social media these days, perhaps LinkedIn and occasionally Instagram. But you have an incredible photographic eye, so much so I'm trying to encourage you to do something with that. And we have a little print ready, waiting to get your stuff into the world. I've been always wanted to ask you, where does that come from? I mean, it's daily, it's deep, it's rich. A lot of it's your own stuff, which is incredible. A lot of it is stuff you farm from the things that you're absorbing. You just have an incredibly eclectic eye. And I want to know what the background to that is. You know, geopolitical strategist who also is a photographer. Not sure that's something one finds very often.
I still would call myself a photographer, being very generous. Like you are, you know, like you've actually, I consider you a photographer. I consider myself like a dabbler. I don't know that. I don't know. Like I just always like to travel, be adventurous. I've always loved magazines. There was a period there. I went to uni, was not really a great student. Took like a gap year. I really wanted to go to graphic design school. I tried to put together a portfolio, took some art classes. They're like, no. But I always had that kind of desire. As a kid, you know, at the time I hated it, of course, but my mom like put us in art classes, me and my brother, the local museum. But I've always been super interested in graphic design. I just find it fascinating, like albums, like how people come up with this stuff or just creativity. And then what's interesting about the internet and Insta, it just allows you to curate stuff that's so interesting. And yeah, it's been fun, like just kind of interesting stuff that I find compelling, weird, interesting. I don't know, maybe because geopolitics is so serious and so black and white that it's fun to have a little creativity. And the photo stuff, I don't know, I've dated a few girls that were into photography, so some of that probably rubbed off on me. I remember once I had this girlfriend who was like, you know, let's go see these ducks at sunrise. You know, I'm crawling in this swamp, taking photos with her, like, you know, what the hell's going on here? But super interesting. But I think it's a good outlet. I don't know. I think there's always been a creative side to me. And even in communications, I think there's an ability to be creative and interesting, whether it's using words or imagery, thinking about the backdrop. A lot of my experience on the campaign trail has always been about the visual, about like the backdrop. If you do an event, you know, at a school, if you do an event at a factory, what are you trying to capture? So yeah, but I appreciate you saying that.
Well, I'm a bit more than saying that. I'm going to hold you to account because, you know, Joe, my creative director, and I are doing some funky things at the moment, and I really do want you to do something with it. We're here to help you do something with it. You got an incredible eye, Mark. And what's fascinating about hearing you say that, which I had no idea about, I can see that you also love graphic design from what you curate from the other stuff that you find. But I see that in the imagery that you create. It's very graphically clean and clear. So yeah, let's do it. Honestly, you need to take it. I don't want to sound like your dad or your older brother, but you need to take it seriously. And by the way, that I'm not for 1 minute buying that bullshit about I'm not a photographer. I've heard that story before. I've done that rodeo. The fact that someone might have actually gone and spent some time in a college is actually neither here nor there. So,
well, I've never thought about. I mean, I just take photos that are like, wow, that's cool. I don't know, like it's just, and I think I tell this to people too about writing or communications. Like, don't be so precious. Like, don't beat yourself up. Like, just talk, write a newsletter, post a blog, take
Yeah.
a photo. Like, it's just one piece of material. There's going to be others. And the only way to get better at being a better communicator is to communicate more. Like, nobody knows how to peel carrots the first time. You got to like look at it, do it. So like, it's like anything. And I think like, don't be so precious. Don't worry about it. Just put it out there and just have fun with it. Don't take it too seriously. Same with cons, like if you have an opinion on something or if you got a product you want to launch, just do it.
Yeah, I guess that's your strap, isn't it? Which is always be communicating.
It's like, to me, communicate. Yeah. It's like a vibe. I think about Pharrell, like even the way, like Maloney, right? The Prime Minister of Italy, the way she dresses, it's very intentional. It's very smart, and she's communicating, right? It doesn't always have to be visual or it doesn't always be vocal, but, when you walk into Claridge's hotel or you walk into Selfridge's, you're there, like when I go to New Mexico, like I know I'm in New Mexico, right? You're like, whoa, this is like a different vibe. I think there's something about that. Like getting back to Dan Campbell, the grit. He's like, yeah, this is Detroit. It's not pretty, but we play really good football here.
Yeah. I love that. I'm going to ask you about your writing practice as well, because you write with incredible clarity and brevity, which I guess goes with the territory in your world. And I've always been fascinated by writers and their practices, as someone who is trying to write more and more now. Dickens, have you heard of him, Mark? He was quite good.
He's got a good future ahead of him, I think.
Yeah, he needed absolute quiet. Apparently, he had 2 doors to his writing room. He needed his writing desk in front of the window. He used goose quill pens and blue ink. He needed a vase of fresh flowers, large paper knife, gilt leaf with a rabbit perched on top, and 2 bronze statuettes, one depicting 2 toads dueling, and the other a gentleman swarming with puppies. Just to keep the balance here with my with my friend on the other side of the pond, Scott Fitzgerald, you probably know this. Alcohol was an absolute prerequisite for his creative process. Sadly, it sort of did him in. But apparently straight gin, Mark, because it couldn't be detected on his breath. Do you have a particular practice? Do you have to sit in a certain place? Do you like doing it at a certain time of day? I mean, your output is obviously, there's a ton of it, but do you need to be in your particular space to do it well?
Oh, you're being so complimentary. Thanks. Yeah, so I think it goes back to, I had a great English teacher in high school. We wrote a lot. What is his name? I'm blanking on his name. I think that helped immensely. There's also a columnist from the Detroit Free Press called Mitch Albom. He's written some books, Tuesdays with Maury. He's an amazing sports columnist that I read religiously, still read him today. And he would, I think, again, like he wasn't precious. He has 1-word paragraphs. Like he doesn't like follow the rules or so rigid. He has a lot of fun with his communications. And I think his style has always been like, it's just latched onto me. So I try to find a way to like make my writing somewhat entertaining and loose and tie in some pop culture stuff. But for me, the perfect setting is I need like EDM, like dance music, like a Pete Tong, Paul Oakenfold, like some crazy English, disco. I need like a lot of noise. And I just kind of get in the zone and write. And I think the key is I have a general idea of where I'm going. And I just let kind of stuff fold out. I just really go straight. I type a lot of stuff, misspellings, poor grammar, all that stuff. And just have some fun with it. Again, like I don't take it too precious. I think you've got to just hit send. And, one of my favorite sayings is about Saturday Night Live. Lauren Michaels, who's the producer, like he's like, listen, this show goes live at 11:30 p.m. on Saturday, whether it's ready or not. Like it could always be better. It could always be worse, but it goes live. And there's something to be said about constraints and just saying, yeah, I'm going to ship this thing. Sure. Every host isn't going to be great or, everything's not going to win a Nobel Prize, but some of them are going to be really good. But, just hit send, have fun with it. Don't overthink it. And again, if you want to be a good writer, the only way to be a good writer is to write and read more. There's no way around it. So, but no, I appreciate you saying that. But I think having like a good foundation, high school, also just being exposed to other writers and kind of like mimic or be inspired by it, I think is really helpful.
Mm. You just reminded me of something when you mentioned the Nobel Prize there. I'm sure you're aware of this because you're a learned dude. But one of my heroes, Mr. Winston Churchill, obviously 50% Yank, 50% Brit. Did you know?
What a writer that guy! What a writer that guy!
Did you know he wrote more published words than Charles Dickens?
Yeah, I believe it. I mean, that
And
guy
won the Nobel Prize for Literature.
What an amazing, what amazing use of words. I have a friend of mine, Virginia Heffernan, who has a PhD in English from Harvard. Just amazing. Like her use of words is so mesmerizing. It's not like Churchill's. There's just so much magic in words, and you can have so much fun with them. Colorful, intentional, dynamic, and but Churchill's books, I've read some of the books on World War II. Just the writing alone is just stunning.
I have to say, Mark, that was about 3 summers ago. I made that my mission. I've got the whole of, what is effectively his autobiography or his own history of the Second World War, 6 books, 12 volumes that were my grandfather's.
Amazing.
Astonishing. It's the greatest. It must be the greatest thing ever written on leadership it's possible to read. It's just astonishing. And not just the sweep and the kind of the breadth of what's covered, the quality of the annexures, all the other correspondences, the letters he was writing. I remember vividly looking at, in one of the volumes, some of the annexures that includes a letter from him to somebody in one of the ministries saying he demanded to know why we hadn't changed the manufacturing process of glass in London, because during the Blitz, every time this glass is getting blown out, kids are getting killed or injured. Is it not possible to make a glass that shatters in a safer manner? And guess what? Pilkington or whoever started making a glass that was much safer in the event of getting blown out because of a bomb. And the extent to which he was able to grasp detail at that degree, while at the time, by the way, we were still completely on our own, holding some kind of, whatever the right terminology is, bridgehead against the world collapsing, it's just astonishing. It's extraordinary. It must be the greatest feat of leadership in humankind, in my opinion.
100%. I think, like, if you look at, that's why I think, like, this economic malaise that we're in right now, I don't know, it's not a great war. It's not World War II. Like, Americans not being content, they literally have everything they want. I don't know. It puts things in perspective.
It does indeed. And that's interesting because, I think you've touched on something there, which is not for this time. There's a bigger question with all of this discussion we've had. And the bigger question is, what are we doing? What do we need? Is it all about what we're making? Is it all about money and profit? And I think deliberately today, I didn't want to go down that rabbit hole because I think it's a very different discussion. But for the avoidance of doubt, I think we both agree it's incredibly important to consider just what it is that we're building all these models off. Because it may well be that we've got it all so badly wrong simply because we're following a model of human satisfaction, which is fundamentally flawed.
Well, especially when you have access to literally everything you could possibly want.
Yeah.
There's no constraints.
So I'm conscious of your time, dear boy, but I've got a couple more things for you. I want to know at the moment, specifically at this moment, 16th of April, 2025, what's lighting you up? What's putting a spring in your stride?
Well, I think in the short term, just buying some adventures, like just traveling more. So that's super important. I've been deeply interested in the Winter Games that are going to be in Milan next year. I think that's just super cool. And I want to be a part of it somehow. Like sports, man, like the World Cup. I don't know. There's something just about like sports, and travel. But I know I want to do some creative projects. I've been dabbling in this book on negronis. I want to put together, which is a bit about adventures and just kind of having drinks around the world. It's funny, like I consider myself, I'm a really good writer and like a 750, 1,000 words. But I've never done a book. So I need to do like a proper book. I taught a class at GW, George Washington University, and I want to put that into some kind of book, which seems daunting to me. And then take more photos. It's a high compliment for you to say it's worthy of them going into print. But I think the pretty big thing, it's like adventures are really like what I'm all about. I just turned 54 last week. You know, there's a lot more of the world I want to see.
Good man. It's funny, Mark, you know, because we've come back to this point again about creativity. And as you know, the whole sort of ethos for this is just about, you know, radical, unbounded, insatiable curiosity. And as you know, I think curiosity is effectively kind of the gateway drug to creativity. It's the creatine to the sort of creativity muscle in some respects. And when you were talking about Pharrell earlier, I was thinking about Kendrick Lamar. I don't know if you've ever seen that wonderful interview he does with Rick Rubin. I'll send it to you. Probably.
Yeah, that'd be great. Rubin's amazing.
6, 7, 8 years ago. I think it was GQ. I'll send it to you. But it's so fascinating because the impression I got from listening to that, and I didn't know much about Kendrick Lamar as a musician. I wouldn't say I love all music, but I wouldn't say he's somebody that was, you know, in my canon of favorites. But everything he does as a musician is kind of expressing his very existence. The best creators, the best artists, they express themselves in whatever they do, in however they perform. And so for you to say what you just said about the writing and the photography, a book about Negronis, that's what I hope in the time that's left. For me personally, and for those of us that are thinking about this stuff, we need to get fully plugged in. It all needs somehow to connect. And I don't know that you really understand how important that is. God, this is going to be terribly alienating. But until you get to the wrong side of 50 and you've been kicked in the nuts plenty of times and you've got scar tissue, and then you suddenly realize, or in my case anyway, speaking for me, you suddenly realize that all these apparently different meandering paths led to the sort of same place for a reason. And it's perhaps, you know, the confidence to self-express through creativity.
Yeah, I love like that idea, like the talent stack, right? Like getting those different skill sets kind of leads you to where you are today, be more reflective and experiences. And also for me, I've been going on a bit of a spiritual journey in general, and just, you know, that Beatles song, The Long Winding Road, you know, it's not always straight, but sometimes it's got to be curving, but that's good. You know, that's where some of the magic is, like in the muck, because you can come out of it. So
absolutely.
But I think, I don't know, it's pretty cool being in your 50s.
Yeah. Yeah. Final thought then, you know, in a world where we're just relentlessly overstimulated, and there's so much coming at us, and in your world more so than ever, because you have to walk into the storm daily of news feeds and TV and imagery, and
I have to pay attention, unfortunately.
Yeah, and I think attention is the most valuable resource of all. How do you protect yourself? How do you stay away from all the, forgive me, from all the shit, all the muck?
Yeah, so I think, well, I've been paying attention to politics for a long time. So I talk a lot about like this, there's a concept like the signal and the noise, right? So I really focus on the signal, like what are like the 4 or 5 data points that really, really matter. You can be aware of kind of the noise on the other side, but you know, what are the things that really, really matter, right? So I think that's important. And also like setting constraints on yourself. Like I do pay attention to what's happening in the world, but I don't pay attention to everything. Like I don't know anything about cricket, you know, like what's happening in Malaysia, you know.
Yeah.
I don't really know what's happening in my own state government, right? So which I'm content with. I'm just like, listen, this is what I'm going to pay attention to. This is what I'm going to focus on. This is what I care about. And also part of my daily practice. I mean, what I do about the news, like I do spend like 60 to 90 minutes every day, like reading newspapers online and kind of going through, but I have a process that just kind of like what I do at the end of the day, kind of get ready for the next day, pay attention to what's happening. So I think it's like being disciplined, setting up constraints, but also recognizing like not everything's important, just being, but knowing what is important and paying attention to that. It's like really critical. But I only think that happens because I've been doing this for so long. That just comes from experience. It's probably akin, I would imagine it's akin to like a pilot, somebody sailing a sailboat who's, they just know like, all right, these are 4 or 5 things that really, really matter. Sure, it'd be great to pay attention to 20, but these 5 things, I'm really going to pay attention to.
Fantastic. That's very helpful for me. Obviously, I was asking for a friend, Mark, about the distractibility and not being able to focus on the right things. So I'll
Well, it is like tempting. I mean, I'm not great at it, and I do go down rabbit holes. And I think the nature of communications too, like any given moment, something could happen that can kind of change the day.
Yeah.
So I'm not like, even I'm giving this advice to myself. I think it's really important to be like, these are the core things. Like, I don't read every newspaper. There's like 10 that I read like every day. I go visit the website, right?
Yeah.
And that's good enough. Sure, I could do 20, but 10's good enough.
But you're keeping your radar kind of fueled by careful attention to the stuff that matters, and also your own intuition, which, as you said, you've been doing it a long time. And that intuitive strength, I think, is often underrated. You know what to pay attention to without giving it a second thought.
Yeah, I do. I feel like, especially when I give advice to other people, or I work with folks that don't have as much experience around politics, they get really worked up about stuff. And, I'm basically coaching them or talking them off and saying that's, you may think that's a problem, but that doesn't really matter. This is what matters.
Mark, it's been fabulous. Thank you so much for carving out a couple of hours of your time.
Thanks for having me on. This was great.
Absolute pleasure.
But yeah, when are we getting back to the Lake District?
I'd love to have you. We're definitely doing it again next year. So yeah, I'll get that on the agenda early. Football, sport of all sorts, books, music, cars. I mean, what's not to love about you, Ross? And an ability to provide clarity in geopolitical madness. So that's it's been really kind of you to share your thoughts and time.
Yeah, it's fun. It'll be fun to see what King Charles does. He's actually, yeah, he's like, this is his moment. Like, in some ways, getting back to what we just talked about, like the talent stack, years of experience, the moment to shine.
Yeah, he's a wise guy. I think he'll make all the right calls. He'll be obviously well briefed by government on what the expectations are, but he's his own man as well, and I think that's important.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, great. Mark, have a great rest of the day, my friend.
Thanks, Carl. Wonderful to see you. Go Lions.
Go Lions.